Welcome back.
Hey, want some more resentment? We like a double dose of resentment in your marriage. Woo-hoo. We know that that's what everybody's expectation was when they were up on the altar giving their vows. It's like, oh man, I want a resentful marriage here. Well, you are in luck. We've got 10 more rules that you can follow for your resentful marriage. But also here, in all seriousness, we get to like the things on the other side of that, the things that are actually going to lead to that thriving, intimate marriage that you really want. But we're going to approach this with a little bit of levity. We're
going to start with what not to do and then finish with what maybe you could try doing.
It's
and that's
fun.
it.
It'll be fun.
It's fun. You guys would probably listened to the first one. This is number 2. So
cool. See you guys in there.
Hey guys, welcome back. We're talking about how you build a resentful marriage. Because I know you all want it, right?
I want that.
Yes.
So if you listen to our last episode, we gave you 10 rules to build your resentful marriage. And we've got 10 more for you here today. Okay, so like we love leaning into this and just a little bit behind the scenes here. We're going to be going to character here and kind of lampooning this. Because I think this is it's one of those topics that needs a little bit of levity in it, because it can be very heavy. We're talking about resentful marriage, but if we can kind of look to just laugh at ourselves, because you may, as we're going through this list of things that build your resentful marriage, you may feel a little bit convicted or be like, I did that. It's important to be able to laugh at this, okay, because we don't laugh, we'll cry, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So there's great hope in this. So it's not meant to dig, maybe a little bit. But know this, even as we're sharing this, is something we realized in the last podcast, like there were moments where I felt very cringy because it was like, dang, man, I did that. And like
this morning.
That's literally
I did
a thought.
This morning. Yeah.
That's literally a thought that I thought about my wife, my beautiful wife. You are beautiful.
Thank you. All right. Well, that's not helpful because we're trying to build a resentful marriage.
I know. So, let me get into character here.
So we're going to go into character, guys. And yes, this may evoke some ownership, which is great. That's what we want you to do. But it's going to be like we're like from Screw Tape Letters, like these little demons trying to get in people's heads.
Young Wormwood. Listen, young Wormwood. Okay. All right, let's jump right into it. Okay. So we're continuing on. We're at number 11 here. Number 11, I love this one.
Yes.
This is a great one for building a resentment. Talk about your spouse behind their back to your friends and call it venting.
Yes.
Right? Something about venting that I really love about this one, because really what you're doing is you're detracting and you're airing dirty laundry and you're talking about all the bad things about the other person. And you're talking to somebody that doesn't have any perspective to be able to see the good, right? All they have is the perspective that you are offering to them, right? And so this is surely going to elicit an emotional response in them where they start to feel even defensive themselves. And so they get to start attacking your spouse too. So it's great. So you get to feel more connected with your friend, but both of you get to attack your spouse. And so it's going to build further rifts in your relationship with your spouse, right? Because your friend and you are ganging up on your spouse.
And
That's awesome.
You can do this with a friend, or you can do this with family members too.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, family members are definitely going to take your side. So, it's easy.
This is really good because then you can get together at family events and your mom or your dad or your brothers or sisters or something, they can actually look at your spouse with that same lens that you've been cultivating in them. And that is going to affect the way that they show up. And they're going to be really kind of probably, I don't know, not very irritated towards your spouse. And then he or she will kind of feel that too, right? And then that'll trigger them. And so anytime we get opportunities to create more triggers, that is opportunities for more resentment here as well. So good.
And there is something about saying things out loud about somebody who you love, air quotes, saying things out loud that is detracting. That does, definitely strengthens the neural pathway in your brain.
Yes.
Which kind of brings us to the next one.
Yeah, go for it.
Number 12, focus on the things that you hate about your spouse or dislike or are annoyed by. It doesn't have to be hate, but anything that kind of aggravates you. And then think about them throughout the day.
I really like this one because like you may think that you need to vent, you need somebody else to vent, but like here's the beautiful thing. Like you can just, you can kind of just like think on these things yourself, right? And so what's great about this, when you're stewing on this, you really get to create a straw man argument for your spouse, right? You get to like have this argument with your spouse in your head, and you get to picture the things that they would say in response.
You get to
and
win.
Be like, oh, this is what I would say too. And you get to like really have this nice dominant feeling where you feel just like better, you feel dominant, you feel very empowered by it. And you feel very righteous with it as well. And so this is great. Like the more you can focus on the things you don't like about your spouse, it really solidifies those neural pathways so that like your state of being becomes resentment itself.
Yes.
Like you just default to it. And like when you can start defaulting to resentful behaviors and thoughts about your spouse, like that's where you're really you're capturing momentum that just perpetuates the resentment going forward.
Well, also there's a saying too in the mindset coaching world, and I think this is the reticular activating system, but it's what you focus on, you find.
Oh, I'm so glad you're bringing this up.
So like if you're focusing on the things that agitate you about your spouse, you're going to find those.
Yes.
You're going to find more, which is great to build up resentment.
You might even invent some, which is like totally cool. Do that here as well.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Number 13, make sure you take advice from people with marriages that are just as resentful as yours.
Yeah, or just crappy marriages in general. I mean, it could just be like, oh, you guys don't ever communicate. Like, take advice from those people too.
Yeah. Like it's really, blind leading the blind is really like, there's something very helpful in that when you want a resentful marriage. Okay. So, especially when they can kind of like talk, like maybe they've read the books and things like that, but like they say all these things, but they just have no idea how to apply it to their life, and their marriages are crap. Right.
Yeah.
So like, that's good. Like make sure you seek those people out. Especially if they're like your best friends or your family members, right?
Yeah, and you know how you can find them? They're the people complaining about their spouses out loud. They're the people who are subtly trying to manipulate their spouses.
Yep.
They're the people who have manuals for their spouses or the unspoken expectations. So like that's how you find these people. So find them and then go take advice from them.
Yeah, they're following rules 1 to 10. So check out that podcast as well. I think that'll be very helpful. All right, because there's nothing better. Like misery loves company, resentment loves company too. So that shared, anything that could, like resentment creates, like has this way of creating disconnection. Okay, and we're like by God's design, we're wired for that connection. And so when we can settle for a false connection through a shared misery and a shared resentment, like that's great because like it kind of like satisfies us for a little bit, and so we feel like we're actually getting more connected, but like you're not really. It's actually going to create more resentment, and that's what you want. So like follow this rule here as well.
Yep.
Okay, number 14.
Okay,
let's do it.
Never ask your spouse questions about what's going on in their life, but get mad when they don't ask you questions about your life.
Nothing like a double standard.
Yes,
that creates real resentment. In
yourself and in your spouse, probably.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that would be one of those double whammies too, because you're like, he just never asked me about my life.
Yeah. Make sure you call him a narcissist too.
Yes.
After that.
Oh yeah. But then, or selfish or whatever, you know, then you don't ever look at your own like lack of curiosity about your spouse. So
yeah. It's cool. It's another way of just handing more power over to your spouse. And it kind of goes back to like those rules that we talked about in 1 through 10, where you have these expectations that you don't communicate. Remember, don't communicate your expectations if you want a resentful marriage. Okay. Because then your spouse might actually be able to meet those expectations, which is not, we don't want that in a resentful marriage.
But this one is kind of like taking it the next step. So it's not even not communicating it. It's like not asking. It's not doing the thing.
Yeah. I love this one here because it's like we even see this in election season, which when we're recording this right now, and it kind of falls into this nice little gaslighting area. All right. So when rule number 15 here, when they blame you, blame them right back. Okay. And if you can blame them for the same thing that they're blaming you for,
that's called gaslighting.
That's awesome. Like that's like gaslighting really.
Well, actually, gaslighting is when you blame somebody for the thing that you are actually doing, knowingly blaming them. I mean, you could do that too. That actually would really work to build up resentment.
It's a bit of a tactical tip here. It's like, do this. When you see this, do this, right? It's a tactical tip that kind of builds off of one of the previous rules of not taking accountability for your actions and just never apologizing or looking for where you might have been wrong. But rather, like, what really helps is leaning into that rule to justify your hurtful things that you're doing towards your spouse. So it's just like, yeah, I know it hurts, but it's justified.
I like to call this tactic or this rule the cycle of powerlessness. Mm-hmm. Okay, because if we went back to that definition of what resentment is, which is, what is it? Bitter indignation for what is it? For being treated unfairly. Or perceived, like, maybe thinking that you're being treated unfairly. It doesn't matter. Either way, it leads to resentment. So, and in this case, when you're doing that cycle of powerlessness, like, you're both triggered and both victims, which is great to build up resentment.
Yeah. I love this one here too. Okay, rule number 16. Excuse me, I just burped. Rule number 16, demand immediate perfection of yourself and your spouse. Because let's face it, like, I know a lot of you want your marriages, having read all the books and gone to the Theology of the Body Institute courses, and you've got this
nailed
marriage.
It. I'm going to nail it.
You got it on lockdown. Like, the theology, you've got it all figured out. And so, like, and you did all that work so that you wouldn't have to make those mistakes in your marriage. Okay, you could be perfect when you showed up, and that's a great thing. Because when you're not, like, there's moments where you realize that you're not perfect. Like, have that expectation. This will create tons of disappointment in you and tons of disappointment in your spouse.
Yes.
Okay, disappointment is just when you have an expectation and reality doesn't really meet that expectation. So have that really high expectation of perfection. Like, there's no higher expectation than perfection. And so you can create a lot of this disappointment in your marriage, and nobody likes to feel disappointed. And so when you start to feel that disappointment that you don't want to feel, that emotion, you can start to, like, resent yourself and resent your spouse as well as the cause of that disappointment for not meeting your expectations.
I think this is another thing too. Make perfection your God.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, definitely be a Pelagianist. That is going to lead to your own resentment.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's nothing like perfectionism to really bring about shame as well.
And also, like, impatience, too. I think there's, like, an urgency with it, too.
Well, you can talk on the urgency. What I love talking about in the shame piece is that shame inclines you to hide, right? And hiding is when you're, like, separating from the other person, which again, that separation is what resentment is doing, right? We don't want to if we want a resentful marriage, we don't want connection, all right? So shame really gets in the way of that intimate, vulnerable connection, and it causes us to hide, which is, like, what we're looking for in a resentful marriage, okay? So the shame, but you brought on, like, the virtue.
Oh, urgency.
The urgency.
Yeah, like impatience. So definitely rush to perfection. And, like, don't even ask for their consent to it. Just be like, hey, I'm rushing to perfection, and you should come along with me.
Yes, if they don't have the standard of perfectionism that you have, make sure you shame them for it. Make sure you let them know that they should be holding themselves up to a higher standard.
Yeah.
Like, again,
out loud
excellence.
or in your mind.
Yep.
Either one works.
Either way, we'll breed lots of resentment. Okay. Number 17. Look at all fights and arguments as a sign that your marriage is failing.
Oh, yeah. So it's like, okay, explain more about this one.
A great expectation for a resentful marriage is that it's love means never having to say you're sorry. Right? And so that marriage is all about, it's meant to be
perfect going into
perfect
it.
in the relationship, right? And an absence of any sort of tension or argument means that your marriage is super healthy, right?
I think it's also, like, lacking authenticity. So, like, you don't want to be authentic or honest with somebody or argue with them.
And you definitely don't want to have anything that could reveal a defect in you that the Lord may even want to, like, purge or perfect that, right? So, like,
don't go there if you want resentment in your marriage.
If there's any sort of arguments in the marriage or disconnect, like we want to hide those things. All right.
Make that mean your marriage is failing.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
And then what will happen is you'll probably blame your spouse for all of those things.
Yeah. Even like stewing on this thought, my marriage is failing, or it might be failing. That's like a really icky thought.
I think it's like fear-based too.
Right. And it's going to create a lot of that just icky emotion that you don't necessarily like feeling. And again, like whenever you can create an icky emotion through the thoughts and the perceptions that you choose, you get to take that emotion that you don't like and blame it on your spouse. All right? You fall back on that blaming role, which is really helpful. Again, this builds great amounts of resentment in your marriage. Okay.
All right. Number 18.
Yeah.
Really take time to consider whether or not you married the wrong person.
This is so good.
It's kind of like the same principles as the last one, too.
Yeah.
Where it's like my marriage is failing, or maybe I married the wrong person.
Well, this is like really good, especially if you're inclined towards perfectionism. And if you really believe in Rule 17 that we just shared, that like any sort of conflict in a marriage means that like your marriage is failing. A way that you can kind of try to solve that problem is by thinking the thought, maybe I married the wrong person.
Oh, and then blaming it on them.
It's really good because like if you can solve the problem that you married the wrong person, then like the fact that your marriage is failing isn't mean that it's like failing. It's just like it's a consequence of you just married the wrong person, right? And like there's really only one way to like fix that one. We can kind of see where that goes, but like even just wondering this. And again, if you can bring this into like your conversations with your friends, on like whether or not like what your life could have been like with this previous partner person that you're dating, like that's cool too. Like when you can look back and you can really idealize previous relationships to be
possible future ones.
Right, as something that you could have gone back to, like, and you can indulge in those fantasies, right? You don't necessarily have to be like outwardly adulterous, right? But you can at least indulge in those fantasies, like in your mind. That's something that will create further disconnect and resentment in your marriage here as well. It's pretty cool. Like that's a good one here as well.
That will work. All right, 19, tolerate abusive behavior and think it'll get better when I ignore it.
Yeah, like I don't even need to sit on this one too long, but I mean just like allowing somebody to like continue the abusive behavior with this thought that it'll just like eventually stop on its own. Like that's awesome because that's how abuse stops.
And that is, yes, and that will build resentment. And I'm going to add to this one actually, just like a subcategory. Call non-abusive behavior abusive.
Okay.
That's another thing too. So it could be like something that maybe just kind of offends you or you don't prefer it. Call that abusive. Yeah. That's going to build resentment too.
Yep.
Because you are now, the victim to it. So of course you're going to resent, your villain in your life. Okay.
And I'm just going to take the mask off here for a second. Folks, stick around because we're going to be talking about this one a little bit more in the second half of the podcast, okay? Because I know abuse is a really touchy one here, and it's hard even to introduce a little bit of levity in it. Okay. Mask back on. Number 20 here. Okay, finally, presume that you and your spouse share the same ideals, and make sure that if you find out that they don't share your same ideals, that you just don't talk about it. Yeah. I mean, this is
hide
good.
Hide it away.
Yeah, this is like whenever we can be presumptive. Presumption gets rid of curiosity, and when we're not curious, we don't approach the person as mystery, right? Which is everybody loves being put into a box, right?
So I mean, well, if you want a resentful marriage,
yes,
to a box,
yes, absolutely. So like all that stuff. Okay, that was 11 through 20.
All right, I'm going to read them off.
Okay, and we're like mass off.
Yes.
Okay, like
and scene.
So like, even again, as going through those things, and it's just kind of like there's kind of like it's kind of like watching Ricky Gervais at the Golden Globe Awards. Where it was just like hosting the Golden Globes, where it's just like, oh, he's really roasting people, and some of the stuff he was saying was like dark,
and it was true,
and people were just kind of
that's why it was offensive.
Like Tom Hanks is just kind of like, whoa, man, like he's going there. So there's again, we're leaning into these things. We're calling upon the grace of God. We're saying, Lord, please come into our lives and into our marriages where the resentment is. Lord, we know that where fear is, your love is not there. So we pray for a grace and for your mercy and for your compassion to be with us as we explore these places that we are not proud of in our marriage, perhaps places of shame and pain and hardship. And we invite you to be with us and show us your merciful love, that misericordia, that heart that gives itself to those in misery. And Lord, we place our hope in you to transform us into new creations and transform our marriages into new creations. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. All right.
So here's what we're going to do. We're going to read off the rules again, just the rule itself, not anything else.
The resentment rule.
Yes, we're going to read off the resentment rules that we just went over, and then we are going to give you a counter strategy or just ways to think about it differently.
All right. Rule 11. What do we got?
Talk about your spouse behind their backs with your friends or family, and call it venting.
Yeah. Okay. Here's
counter.
I think it's healthy to have friends that you can share your intimate self with. I do think it's also prudent to limit the amount of people that you share this information with. And to the greatest extent possible, you are actively trying to preserve the good name of your spouse when you are sharing this information with somebody else. It's hard to do when that person has a relationship with your spouse. It can kind of make a challenge for them,
like triangulate a little bit.
Yeah, it can because oftentimes we're sharing a perspective, and then you're putting an expectation on this person to have the maturity to be able to kind of own their own lens still, right? Because they're only seeing the situation from your perspective.
I think you also just discern detraction. So you can use this skill, like across the board, not just with your spouse, but like, would I be saying this about this person if they were standing right there? And would they be like, would they agree with me? And also, would they be like lifted up? I mean, guys, that's such an easy way to measure. Am I detracting against this person? Like, detraction in this, even like in the spiritual world, is equivalent to like cursing somebody. That
it falls under the fifth commandment. Of thou shalt not kill. Yeah. So it's grave matter.
Yes.
It's great. The church calls it grave matter when we talk about this. Okay, so that's like that element of it being mortal sin. All right, that one of the three. It is grave matter. I would say this too. I also want to just hold space for being in your emotion and just needing a little bit of like, I am airing this stuff out, but I'm doing it with the intent of gaining some greater clarity. And I have the relationship that I have is somebody that is going to work with me towards gaining greater clarity and gaining a virtuous perspective that is going to lead to a repair of the relation, a restoration of the relationship. And so that could be a relationship with a coach. That could be a relationship with a counselor. Could be a relationship with a spiritual director.
People who know how to be objective.
These are these relationships where the nature of the relationship is to provide that to you. All right, that's not necessarily the nature of a friend's relationship. Okay, that friend relationship may be kind of there to just be with you, but not necessarily give you the advice that you may need. Okay. Yeah. 12.
Focus on the things that you hate about your spouse and then think about them throughout the day.
Yeah. The opposite here is take time, like actually build it in, especially if you're struggling with resentment. Take time to meditate on the good things about your spouse and the beautiful things that they've done throughout the day. I often will give assignments to clients to take their daily gratitudes. Maybe they're using our journal. And one of those exercise 2 is a daily gratitude, and say, this is going to be, you're going to do 10 gratitudes about your spouse and they're going to be brand new, right? So it really gets them expanding their mind, expanding the neural circuitry.
And you have them do that every day?
Have them do that daily, right? And so building a habit of looking at that. Okay. And what that does is it at least starts to balance the perspective, and so that you're looking at all the evidence.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think also just ask the Lord in prayer, like, Lord, how do you see my spouse? Like, give me your eyes to see my spouse, like those eyes of love.
Yep. Okay.
All right. Number 13, make sure you take advice from people with marriages who are just as resentful as yours, or more, who are in terrible marriages. I'm going to go ahead and say that.
Yeah. I think it's by God's design, we grow in relationship. And so having good counsel in your life, or some good mentors, is something that's very important. I think you can go to your parish, right? This is going to be something that one way that you could, if say you don't necessarily have a good mentor couple that you're working with, this is something that more parishes are starting to stand up. And to be able to go to your pastor and say, okay, is there a good mentor couple that we can kind of sit down with? Because automatically going to marriage counseling may not necessarily be where you're at, right? Not everybody needs a marriage counselor, but I think it's important for us to have those good mentor relationships in our life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think this is really helpful to find mentor couples who have similar temperaments as you and your spouse. I think that's really helpful, because a sanguine is going to have a very different relationship with their phlegmatic, melancholic spouse, than a choleric. And so, I don't know. If you guys haven't taken our free temperaments test yet, you should.
Yeah, it's in the show notes, so you can check it out.
Yes, go check it out. But I think just knowing these mentor couples that you're reaching out to know what their temperaments are, and have them kind of be aligned with your own.
Yeah, and if you are a mentor couple and you're wanting to grow in your skills to be able to accompany people, take a look at some of our trainings that we have, our coach training that we've got.
Yep.
Because part of our mission is recognizing that there's a poverty of human formation, which is what a lot of these skills are that we're talking about. They're human formation skills. One of the reasons why there's such a lack of good human formation in the church is because there's a lack of well-formed formators that are out there witnessing it. And maybe you have a great marriage, but you don't necessarily know how to teach others or accompany others towards that great marriage. What our training will do is it will help you to kind of identify and put language around the things that are working in your life, rather than just operating from intuition and just defaulting to, well, do this, try this, and what we call coaching in the action line or coaching in the A line. But it'll really help you to mine what's going on in your interior life with your spouse, so that you can share that interior life as a mentor couple with these other couples, and teach them how to be students of their own interior life and share that interior life with one another in their marriage. Cool. All right, number 14.
Never ask your spouse questions about what's going on in their life, but make sure that you get angry when they don't ask you questions.
Yeah. Initiate curiosity.
Yeah.
With your spouse. And curiosity comes from questions, right? And so even being able to have standard questions that you ask your spouse, maybe at the dinner table, and mix it up a little bit. It's always good to kind of...
We have that worksheet that I'm sure... Could we put that in the show notes?
That's, well, the 101 questions to ask.
Yeah.
I know that's in our academy. I think we just need to add it to our free resources page. And so... I'll add that. By the time this is up, our free resources page, if you go to catholiccoaching.com, very top, you can look in the drop-down menu here if you're on your mobile app, but there's a free resources tab, and you can download the 101 questions, better questions to ask. This is gold, right, for generating curiosity in any relationship.
Yes. Yeah, and you'd be shocked about how little you actually probably know about your spouse when you start asking these questions. Matt and I used to go out on dates, and we would have a competition of like who could ask the more creative question to the other person. So that's just another thing that you could try.
Yeah, even I would argue this, like start with that curiosity about yourself here as well. Right? Because again, the upper limits of our ability to love the other person is our ability to love ourselves, or be curious about the other person is be curious about ourselves.
Yeah. So why are you getting angry that they're not asking you? Like, that's a great question to ask yourself right out of the gate. Like, why am I even angry about this?
Yeah. It's fodder for a real intimate dialogue, prayerful dialogue with the Lord while asking some of these questions. Cool. And it approaches the person as a mystery, which is always very dignifying.
Totally. Rule 15, when they blame you, blame them back.
I like when your spouse blames you for something, pause and see if there's any merit in it. What can you own? Like that's so always the question. What can I own here? Because when we automatically, and this is, I've been in this default, and people that have kind of this anxious attachment style, which I often have, and if you're familiar with attachment theory, which is where there's this presumption that other people are better and you're kind of not so good, we can kind of default to just receiving the blame with that anxious attachment style and just owning it and be like, oh, they're right immediately. And one of the things that's been very healing for me and helped to bring a lot of my relationships into a more secure attachment is to pause and be like, okay, what can I own from what they're saying, but what is not mine to own? And being able to voice that and be like, okay, all right, you know what? I agree with you over here. This is something I didn't say that. That wasn't really a kind way for me to bring it about. Okay, that's something that I'll own. But like this piece over here, like that was not me. Like that's coming from someplace else. Like, tell me, what's that all about? And kind of use it as an opportunity to kind of,
grow in intimacy, grow
in that curiosity. Curiosity sees a person as a mystery.
And there's an ownership there too. There's totally ownership. I would also add in there, go listen to our podcast on blame. Like Stop the Blame Game.
How to Stop the Blame Game. That was a really popular one.
Yeah, it's a couple of podcasts back. So that's another little practical application you can put here.
Yeah, on the flip side, that avoidant attachment style, which sees the other people as bad and you as good, like that immediately just has a tendency to dismiss any accusation that a person has on them. And again, it still works for that avoidant attachment style person to be able to have, okay, what can I own? Like it's just a really great question here. Number 16?
16, demand immediate perfection of yourself and your spouse.
Yeah, the counter to this we have is let yourself and your spouse be imperfect first. We have a saying, if you're perfect, you're dead. Okay, like perfection doesn't exist on this side of heaven. It is what you enter into in the beatific vision. And the passage to perfection is death. Okay, so if you're still alive and you're listening to this, guess what? You're imperfect, right? And that's okay. So let yourself and your spouse be imperfect and allow their imperfection to be a source of perfection for you.
Source of sanctification.
Yes. So this is where that spiritual judo starts to kind of like, this is where the ways that your spouse's imperfection can trigger, the fear response in you or the lack of charity in you. If we just look at it, okay, I'm being irritated by this person, lack of perfection, there's an opportunity to grow, and that's all imperfection is. It's just an opportunity to grow with the Lord, who is perfect, the only one who can perfect. It kind of changes perfection.
Yeah, I think it indicates a void that the Lord wants to come in and fill in your life, that trigger, that response in you. And so I think it is a great way to provoke this intimate prayer.
Yeah. And it's actually evidence to the marriage doing its work of perfecting one another, which kind of brings us into Rule 17.
Look at all fights and arguments as a sign that your marriage is failing.
Yeah. I'd rather approach these things as an opportunity for growth, right? Always an opportunity for growth. Yep. Opportunity to own what's yours, to surrender what is not yours. Those things that you surrender that you wish would change, be it your spouse's values towards things, their prayer life, how they want to parent the kids or address certain things or whatever. Like that stuff that you get to bring to the Lord, surrender to the Lord, and maybe your spouse is, say, away from the church, or your spouse is engaged in something. Maybe it's pornography or something that is really heavy and detrimental to their salvation. To kind of own that and own like your powerlessness to actually change that in them, but own also the reality of like the strength of the sacrament of your marriage and lean into that grace that's there and the special power through the sacrament that God has given to you to really be that helpmate in the sanctification of your spouse, right? And don't be surprised when it looks like Don't be surprised when it looks like Christ crucified.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really that mutual submission that we hear about in the scripture. 18.
It's so funny the way that you just presented that. It was very melancholic. I look at him like, this is like the best adventure that the Lord is like calling you on.
I love that. Yeah. That's really cool.
All the way to heaven is heaven because Jesus is the way. I don't know who. I think that was
That's Catherine of Siena.
Yes, St. Catherine of Siena.
Boom. Doctor of the church. Write it on your bookshelf.
So you can look at your
bookshelf.
Yes, you can
look at
it
on
as
a sticky note.
You can look at it as a cross, or you can look at it as an adventure. It kind of depends on your temperament, I guess. All right. Cool. So, 18. Really take time to consider whether or not you've married the wrong person.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Whether or not you married the wrong person is an irrelevant question. It is a terrible question. Like there's no good fruits that come from that. All right. It's irrelevant. It doesn't actually fix anything. It causes problems. So the advice here is just strike it from the record. Choose not to think that one anymore.
Can I flip it?
Sure. Go for it.
Just flip the question. How have I married the right person?
Yeah.
And go find evidence for that.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk abuse.
Oh, okay.
Number 18. Number 19. Excuse me. 19.
Tolerate abusive behavior. I'll get better when...
It'll get better.
It'll get better when you ignore it. Yeah.
Yeah, like the first thought that comes to mind here without like recognizing that abuse is something that is like, it's heavy. Like, and in a lot of cases, it's very real. There is real emotional abuse. There's real physical abuse. There's real spiritual abuse that's taking place. All right. And so this is where you do not want to deal with this by yourself. Okay. But we also really do not want to create conditions to perpetuate or allow the abuse to continue. Right. And that's something that we get to own that is near impossible to do by yourself. Right. Because it's like to counter the abuse also means to create some challenging circumstances in your marriage sometimes, right? And so you need some professional guidance here that is going to be very important to kind of to overcoming this if you're at a place where there's some real abuse that's taking place in your marriage.
Yeah, and we as coaches are not that professional help. Yeah. I mean, we can help you with your mindset around it, but we can't come in and help out that way. We haven't been trained in that way.
Sometimes there's a real a physical separation that's necessary for these things. And so getting somebody whether it's a social worker that's dealt with these, that knows the best practices for dealing with these things.
Find an expert.
You want to have good counsel there. Okay. Number 20 here.
20. Presume that you and your spouse share the same ideals. And then make sure that when you find out that you don't... then you just don't talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. So again, this is keeping curiosity in your marriage. There are times in your marriage where disappointment will show up. And again, disappointment is it means that there's a difference. There's some delta, some, distance between an expectation that you had or an ideal that you had and where reality is ending up. And when you find that you have different expectations, whether it's for, whether or not, one spouse is going to be at home while the other one works, or how you're going to be raising your kids, or even we talked about in the last episode,
I think just values
your marital
too.
Intimacy, or your personal values.
Yeah, I think all of that stuff needs to be discussed for sure, and ongoing, because we're always in this state of conversion. We are always kind of moving and changing and transforming. So our values might become more refined. Our ideals might become more refined. And so just to keep that conversation going.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's just approaching the person with that compassionate curiosity, right? What is it that you value in this? Not like, why do you value this? But like, tell me, like, obviously you value this over here. Tell me what it is that you value. Because folks, what that does is it opens up a dialogue for you to perhaps update your own ideal. Maybe or incorporate the ideal of your spouse. And the foundation of a loving relationship is when two people are freely, of their own free will, pursuing the same common good together, the same goal, the same ideal together. There's something that's awesome when you are on mission with your spouse.
Amen.
Cool.
And that's it. That's all we have for you.
Okay, so that was fun.
Yes. Once again, come and join the Academy or just continue to listen to us. Go subscribe. And you can see our faces on YouTube if you're listening to this on podcast form. come and join us on YouTube, subscribe, and consider joining the Academy. But definitely take your temperaments test and go listen to some of those other podcasts that we talk about here.
Super exciting.
Hopefully this was helpful, guys, and we will see you next week.
All right. Hey, thanks for sticking with us in the Catholic Coaching Podcast. If you like what you heard,
please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again.